The matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. You have to see it for yourself. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Excited to be back with you again, and I was out of town on last week, had to speak at a conference, but I'm so excited to be back for another edition here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. You can listen to us right now throughout the world on the Life Radio Network, 92.9 FM, 1460 AM. Also, you can listen to us internationally through the iHeart Radio Network in the iHeart Media Group, also here in New York City, New York. Now, if you have any questions for our special guest tonight, you can begin to send those questions in right now as we speak at Global Spiritual Revolution Radio at yahoo.com. Again, quickly, beloved, Global Spiritual Revolution Radio at yahoo.com. You can also listen to us through the iHeart Radio Network and the iHeart Media Group, covering 175 nations around the world. Now we have an opportunity to reach at least 100 million people around the world. Again, you can also listen to us through the iHeart Podcasting Network in the iHeart Network out of Canada. All right, please send in your questions right now at Global Spiritual Revolution Radio at yahoo.com. Again, quickly, beloved, Global Spiritual Revolution Radio at yahoo.com. I am excited, including my staff and production team here in New York City, New York, through Global Spiritual Revolution Radio in Media Group, and to have back with us who is no longer a guest on our show. He is a part of the Global Spiritual Revolution family, and we as well are a part of the Bards of War family. And we're excited to have back with us the Honorable Pastor Scott Kesterson. He is the CEO and the president of the Bards of War Ministries. Again, he is the CEO and the president of the Bards of War Ministry. Also, he is the host of one of the most powerful podcasting networks in the United States, the Bards of War podcast. That's on YouTube, the Bards of War podcast. And please go to his website right now at bardsofwar.fm, bardsofwar.fm, including bardsofwarfilm.com, bardsofwarfilm.com. Pastor Scott, thank you so much, my friend, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be back with us here tonight on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio.
good. It's always a pleasure, and we have an incredible show tonight. So I look forward to it, and I think we're going to cover a lot of very interesting ground.
You know what? Me as well, man of God. I concur, and there's so much that is going on, not just here in New York City and throughout the United States, but all over the world. And we're just excited to have you back with us here again on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. Now, continue to send in your questions right now at Global Spiritual Revolution Radio at yahoo.com. Again, quickly, beloved, Global Spiritual Revolution Radio at yahoo.com. Man of God, can you lead us into the mind of God in prayer in Jesus' mighty name?
Heavenly Father, thank you for this time as we share each week to open the hearts and minds to the truth. And we ask that you'll guide us this evening in another period of time that listeners can start to see the true meaning of your word and see the true meaning of your word in this world, to break away the illusions, to shred away the lies, and to give us light in the path ahead, to truly give us the flavor of salt back into our lives. And we say these things in Christ's name. Amen.
Thank you so much, my friend. All right, we're excited to get into a powerful new topic that the mind of God had revealed to me today, and I shared this topic, which is very rare. It's very different, but the Lord gave me this term, Zugzwang, capital Z-U-G-Z, W-A-N-G, Zugzwang, the miscalculation by the deep state, the miscalculation by the deep state. Now, you may wonder, Bishop, where are we going through this topic tonight? Well, that term Zugzwang is a German interpretation describing the obligation to make a move despite the fact that any move will weaken one's position, okay? In other words, it's an indication that play has moved into the end game, Zugzwang, the miscalculation by the global Luciferian deep state. It is a chess term. Saying that to say this, man of God, how do we define PSYOP? What is a PSYOP, number one? And number two, what is a PSY war? What is a PSYOP and what is a PSY war? As you're going to break down the foundation of this term, Zugzwang, the miscalculation of the deep state.
It's a great question. PSYOP in itself is creating the various distortions to truth to try to manipulate an outcome. So we have lived under a PSYOP all of our lives, every one of us, whether we liked it or not, and whether we believed we weren't or not, we have been living under a PSYOP. And that is because everything around us is shaped to create a framework of truth that for the elite is completely controllable. So the PSYOP, on a simple level, shapes the perception of reality in which we have. And what we're really in right now is a war of perception, not a war of truth, but it's a war of perception of what truth is. And that battleground is going on in everybody's mind. That is what they're fighting for, is the control of your mind, your thoughts, the way that you see reality. And the essence of that is the most important principle of this entire era in which we live. Because quite literally, we shape the reality and outcomes which we live into. And that is the power of faith. That is the power, the faith of a mustard seed, to literally be able to move mountains. That's the magic, that's the gift that God gave us. That is us being God's children. An unbelievable power of light, an unbelievable power to transform our world if we understood truly what it means to embrace faith fully and embrace God fully. But the world in which these Luciferians are working with and have constructed around us is to distort that. And that PSYOP goes back thousands of years. And the principal component of that PSYOP is the understanding that they want us to believe that the human itself is flawed. Not perfection in God, but that we are flawed. And the way they've engineered this is quite masterful, because they have created an illusion. We are the cause of wars. We can't get along. We starve each other. We constantly want to pilfer one another over another for the gaining of wealth and material things. That inequality and scarcity are the fundamental principles and result of God's creation, which is humankind. That's the lie. But it's the twisted, distorted truth that they use, and they've used every level of society to do that, including the Word of God, to try to distort these ideas that we are imperfect to such a degree that the only perfection that can be acquired in this evolution is for us to embrace technologies, to ultimately merge with technology, which we call transhumanism, and ultimately transition to a post-human model, which would be something truly perfection, which naturally is of the creation of the Luciferian order. So in the concept of PSYOP, they have distorted the perception of truth by creating a matrix of information that's around us everywhere, which then shapes the way that we believe, shapes our perception of reality, and in effect, then we create the world that we live into.
And you hit a nerve with me, as you always do, a great nerve, because you're such a gifted teacher, Pastor Scott. We have back with us tonight here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio, great brother, great friend of mine, true patriot, soldier of fortune, the Honorable Pastor Scott Kesterson of the Bards Awards Ministries. We are discussing and dissecting the topic Zugzwang, the miscalculation of the deep state. What is the matrix? We've been hearing this term for years, ever since the Matrix trilogy came out years ago. What is the matrix? And is the matrix intertwined into this entity of what we call the deep state? What say you, sir?
Well, absolutely. So I would not just say integrated into the deep state, it's integral to their control and power. So the Matrix in the movie is as if people are living in a hologram. And that's kind of this, it's a little bit difficult to relate at times to how we actually are, because you see this one world and then suddenly everybody steps out of this digital world because they're living in, they're like literally living in cocoons and being programmed in their brain. The truth of this is that we have all been programmed to see the world a certain way. And it's the levels of control of information, I think, are mind-boggling to most. To realize that everything is engineered to shape your behavior, your perception of reality, your willingness or unwillingness to do things, if you are not aware that it's happening to you. The one thing about a PSYOP is that PSYOPs are effective as long as you don't understand they're in effect. But the minute that you become aware of their existence, the power of that PSYOP ceases. It's very much like a coven's curse. The coven's curse works as long as you believe it. But the minute that you step away from it and denounce it and identify it, it fails to have any hold or power over you. But these worlds that we're talking about are absolutely significant and totally designed to suppress the true nature of who we are and to shape what we are. So in the Matrix, if we can think of the analogy I like to use frequently is advertising and purchase of items. So if you take an advertiser and they take a product and they say, we want to sell this product. And the first thing that we'll do is do a market analysis to find out who would be a receptive audience. But then the idea is to find out who those influencers will be that will drive that, because there's an innate understanding of human behavior that is where we are at this point in our evolution, in our spiritual evolution, is that if one person, two people, three people buy something and they're influencers, then they're going to draw others with them. And as they do that, we create a crowd, a movement of people to purchase something. Now, to give you an idea how effective that is, MasterCard had an algorithm that they developed about 5 years ago that in working with an advertiser and a product, they could predict a year out exactly when and what you would buy on your credit card. That's how shapeable we are and influenced we are by of information. Now, advertising is one narrow vein in which we live in, and that's depending on how you live, there's more or less of that around your life. But there's always information, there's always advertising around us because it's part of creating the false worship of material things. We seek to fulfill our spiritual wholeness not through faith, not through God, not through the connection of God through the various forms of gifts in which He gives us, but they supplant that with the fulfillment in our spiritual being through the purchase of a new car, the latest style or fashion, the latest gadget, be it cell phone, computer, whatnot, and we lose touch with purpose and intent, and we go to consumption for the sake of spiritual fulfillment, which is an empty outcome. So we end up with a whole generation, and for that matter, a massive movement of people across the globe that are buying. You know, George Bush made a very interesting statement. I go back to this many times. After 9/11, we had an amazing pause in humanity. That after the towers were destroyed and 3,000 people, innocent people, lost their lives, we ended up with a moment where people reflected on who we were. There was truly compassion going on in society for about 10 days, maybe 2 weeks. And then Bush kicked in and said, if you want to show your patriotism, buy a car. Now think about that. That statement basically was designed intentionally to disrupt the true nature of who we were, to get you back on track, to remind you that you're a slave to the system, you're stepping outside of the matrix of control, and we need you to get back in and start conducting yourself appropriately, which is to buy useless junk so that you can drive an economy which doesn't benefit you, but it benefits the elite. So the PSYOP is so complete that it's hard for us at times to see past the walls of this control system. And this control system, this massive amount of information that's around us that shapes the very reality in which we live, is what we refer to as the matrix.
Again, my friend, it is so powerful. I thought I knew everything when it came to the very system of what we call the matrix. And as a side note to our Global Spiritual Revolution partners, that term matrix is located in the Bible, in the Old Testament. We're getting several thousands of questions coming in already, and we're only 18 minutes into the broadcast tonight. All right, welcome back to Global Spiritual Revolution Radio through the Life Radio Network, 92.9 FM, 1460 AM. Also, we are internationally syndicated through the international media conglomerate, the iHeartRadio Network in the iHeart Media Group, also here in New York City, New York. Zugzwang, the miscalculation of the deep state. There is a psychological or scientific phenomena which is called the Mandela Effect. And so can we tie this in, the Mandela Effect, which is essentially a false memory? It's a phenomenon where a person recalls something that did not happen, or recalls a differently form of the way that it actually happened. Is America going through that psyop of what we call false memory, or the Mandela Effect? What say you, my friend?
I think that's a really excellent way of looking at what we're currently struggling with. There is a powerful effect, there's a powerful mechanism in effect right now, which is rooted in the principles of MK Ultra. MK Ultra was the CIA's training or program, literally break the mind, and ultimately be able to control people through subtle signals and triggers that then would cause them to do certain things. MKUltra has many facets to it. MKUltra has really become a generic catch-all for that broad spectrum of many programs to do many things. MKUltra deals with, there's many divisions or specialties within MKUltra, one of which is in extreme programming where they literally fracture the mind to such a degree that the entire consciousness that exists within the soul is broken. And then they reprogram that into being what they call alterns, which are compartmentalized personalities or compartmentalized memories within the mind, and they reassemble the person. What's interesting about this is there's two parallels to this that happen. One is spiritual. In shamanism, there is a version of this which they go on when they go on a journey using peyote. It's a shaman's guided spiritual journey to reawaken yourself, but the principal concept is to fracture what your construct is in this world and to reassemble that. That was studied and then applied with Timothy Leary through the principles in Princeton when he started to do experimentation with LSD. LSD has very similar properties to the peyote experience. So the CIA's version of this used LSD and other drugs in the early eras of MKUltra, which was all an extension of Operation Paperclip, which meaning that the people that were behind this came over from Nazi Germany to help train this and create these programs in which they could train people to be completely controllable. In a popularized sense, the Hollywood popularized sense, we refer to this as a Manchurian Candidate. And of course, that idea in the media is referred to as a conspiracy theory. So anytime we hear conspiracy, we know right away that there's truth, not falsity, within that, since it is the CIA that created the concept of conspiracy theory in the first place. So you can kind of see the OODA loop that we get stuck in, right?
Yeah.
So the reason all of this ties in is when we start and we take a step back and we begin to look at this whole last 6 months and how much the world has literally transformed. And we've talked at length about COVID-19 and the tie-in of that. Those triggers that were already implanted in people's thoughts had been put there over years. And the idea of pandemic had been well rehearsed within the subconscious of most people's minds. So that when the pandemic trigger was announced, it was a version of mass MKUltra that people responded accordingly, which was the worship of fear. And instead of turning to God and being humbled and putting faith in God, people did the exact opposite. In fact, it's so crazy to look at that when you have President Trump, who has been speaking for 3 years at that point about the fake news and the news being the enemy of the people, and you have a mass amount of people nodding their heads saying, yes, it is. And then the minute that this pandemic trigger hits and you hear all of the fear porn that comes with that, suddenly you see those same, not all, but you see groups of those same people now donning on a mask, willingly putting themselves sheltering in place, willingly going along with draconian rules, and giving up their liberty willingly. Now, this is so important in the whole principle of the Luciferian model because we have sovereignty and free will. That is God's gift to us, and that ultimately is the most powerful gift one could ever be given. And that goes back to, as we've mentioned before, that goes back to the book of Enoch, which is the division that happens and what causes the split between God and what we call and refer to as the fallen angels. God wanted man to be evolved and to live freely and with sovereignty to be able to make the choice to come back to him under free will. The Luciferian, what we refer to as the Luciferian order, did not want that at all. They wanted man to worship them, mandated. That's tyrannical. That's the model in which the MKUltra piece feeds into, and all of this subliminal programming, because ultimately the true power and control over humanity isn't control by authority. It's control by having people willingly give away their free will, willingly give up their sovereignty and their liberty. And in doing so, you aren't just giving up that for the moment in which you live. You're literally giving up control of a portion of your soul. That's the ultimate model of tyrannical control. And that's what is moving behind the scenes here in this whole Luciferian order. So when we get to the modern day, we're seeing some very interesting deep triggers being pulled out, be it racisms, and which we refer to as systemic racism, or we see the supposed pain that these statues bring, and we have the guilt culture that is evolving out of this, which is being proclaimed as, and that's an interesting one in itself, because it's a momentum issue. It's the constant reinforcement that the white culture was guilty of this or guilty of that, and so therefore they must be punished, and you must live in complete guilt, and you must submit now to a new master. The new master is being called Black Lives Matter.
Yes.
Here's an interesting Pew analysis that just came out. This is what Black Lives Matter actually is. 1 in 6 is actually an African American protester. Everybody else is white. Just want to make that clear. Okay. So I've kind of renamed the Black Lives Matter Party, and it's the Baphomet Lucifer Moloch Party. And I think that that's probably more appropriate, because what you're really seeing is the elite Satanists that have hijacked this BLM movement. They have geared this up for years. And if you really look at who the predominant voices are in the BLM movement, it's a elite, predominantly white spokespeople and leadership that is driving BLM. And you really have to ask yourself, why? Why is that become such an issue? Because they're not guilty. They're not doing anything other than funding a movement. They're not changing their life patterns. But they're asking for the enslavement of a mass of people willingly. And as we've discussed before, that movement, BLM with its Antifa arm, have worked together to create a massive psyop and a fear element. They're a minority, but they create the effect that they're a majority by using the information matrix to replicate their message to such a degree that everything that you turn on, everything that you see, everything that you touch is reinforcing the same message. And the messages are things like Trump is a racist, white people are racist, we need to get rid of our statues, we have a horrible racist background in this country, we're a horrible country, all these negative. All of those negative impacts degrade our energy levels within us. And as we do that, we start to embrace a deep psyop within our soul. We start to awaken and create false memories, because the mind is trying to justify what this experience is about. And you have a conscious and a subconscious that's in a duel right now, trying to sort this out. And the more that they can weight this down, there comes a point that the subconscious will quite literally give up and say, okay, I rescind. You got it, conscious mind. If we can create enough counter information flow to this point, that's when we start to rupture through this and push for the awakening, which is literally people, the subconscious is getting re-empowered, going, now, wait a minute, this is just nonsense, and starts to push back. But this is the war again for your mind. And as you pointed out in the question, it is all deals with deep, subtle triggers and the creation of false memories.
Again, this is so jaw-dropping, mind-blowing information here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio with our very special guest, who's no longer a guest here at Global Spiritual Revolution Radio, but he is a part of the Global Spiritual Revolution Radio family all over the world, the Honorable Pastor Scott Kesterson of the Bards of War Ministries. Now, you made mention the Black Lives Matter. I am so happy that you have brought up this terrorist organization. Now, to understand, this is more of a statement I'm going to give, man of God, and you can just take over after I get done, just take it to another level. But the very origin or origination of what we call Black Lives Matter. So when we say matter, and I'm talking to Black folk here tonight, I'm talking to African Americans, not just here in the United States, but all over the world, a part of what we call the Black diaspora. So when you call yourself Black Lives Matter, does matter mean something of significance? Or does matter mean that the individual is nothing more than a chemical compound of what we call matter? Again, this is a psyop, and man of God, you know this. So there are 3 women who are nothing more than witches and warlocks and Satanists, okay? And I'm talking about Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tometi. These 3 women had supposedly founded Black Lives Matter, but in actuality, it was their slave master, George Soros, whose real name is George Schwartz, okay? So the very psyop of Black Lives Matter is it has money, millions of dollars being funneled into it through organizations like Act Blue, the Act Blue Foundation, and the Act Blue Charities Foundation, and the Act Blue Civic Initiative. And I said this a week or 2 ago on Crowdsource the Truth, my friend, as a guest, that the founders of the Act Blue Foundation sat on the board of the GoFundMe organization. And there are 2 men who created the GoFundMe Foundation. And these 2 men are a part of the board of the Act Blue Foundation Charities and Civic Initiative. In the family of George Floyd, they're cleaning up. Now, I'm not castigating the family of George Floyd, but when we're talking about this Zugzwang, this chess terminology of where the deep state tried to checkmate Trump through the psyop of the Russian collusion, through the psyop of the Ukrainian collusion, through the psyop of COVID-19, now that's dying down, through the psyop of this global house arrest. Think about this. I believe that we are experiencing, Pastor Scott, not just the greatest global house arrest in human history, where you got 3.6 billion of the 7.6 billion people on the face of the earth. They're told not just to wear their masks, they're told to stay in their homes, okay? But also, you said something a few minutes ago about just MK Ultra program, which started actually with the Nazis, and then Sidney Gottlieb in 1953 picked up the mantle from Reinhard Gehlen, who was a master spy during the time of the Third Reich. And as a side note, it was General Reinhard Gehlen who had helped build the original Antifa. So that term Antifa also means, comes through the German word Aktion, capital Aktion, which means action. So the Third Reich, before and during the advent of World War II, through their master spy, Reinhard Gehlen, with the financial backing, okay, of many of the richest families, not just in Germany, but throughout Europe, had created the original Antifa. Why were they anti-fascist? Because they were anti-Soviet Union. But the logo, okay, of today's Antifa was created back in 1917 by a Soviet killer who was a protege of Joseph Stalin. His name was Mikhailovich Molotov, who is the creator and the founder of the Molotov cocktail. So what Pastor Scott is teaching us is that both Antifa and Black Lives Matter are not controlled by black people. They're controlled by enemies of the state like George Soros, because he needs to either be executed or he needs to be in prison. And you got these three witches. Man, there's no fear in me. I call it like it is. So these three women, Alicia Garza, she's a member of Omega Phi Beta. Patrice Cullors, she's a member of Omega Phi Beta as well. And Opa Temeti, she's of Nigerian descent. She is a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha. In other words, they're all Boulets, Pastor Scott. What is the Boule Secret Society? The Black Skulls and Bones. And so Black Lives Matter. Do you matter because you think you are of any significance, or are you matter, which means you're nothing more than a particle, a piece of a property compound in the psychic of the deep state? Am I correct in saying this, sir, as we're dissecting not just Antifa, but this terrorist organization called Black Lives Matter?
Oh, absolutely. I think the first thing where we begin is to really realize, and I've said this a lot on my recent podcast, that the world is dividing into two right now. And it's really defined visually by those that willingly and desire to wear the mask and those that don't. And it's got other layers to that. So part of that as well is those that are willingly embracing this idea of racial hate versus those that are trying to build unity. The world is literally, as I say, dividing, and it's quite frankly, the energy that you're putting into is the destiny that you're going to have. This is not an end of times prophecy by any means, but it's a reality that is very evident in around you. And this is something I've said. I don't find myself to be, I'm not an optimist, and I'm not a pessimist, but I am very much a realist. And within that, when you look at Scripture and you look at the world around us, you start to really see the world from a very different optic. The nuances of our life are important, and we've been really trained to ignore many of the nuances. So we begin in this is to look at what's happening to our world, and we quite frankly see one group of people that I will refer to as the Nanny State folks that desire for the state to fix everything for them. Yes. They're looking for laws, rules, tearing down statues. They want to be they're willingly accepting that, and to your point earlier, a fake memory that will cause them to be triggered. So we have to tear down statues, and we need to do something completely different because everything is broken, everything is wrong, so burn it all down. Well, fire, by the very nature of that, is quite literally a kind of this Baphomet visual. And if you look at the inner structure of a place like Chaz or Chop or whatever it was called, look at how much disorder is being seen as order. The Luciferian model is chaos. It is completely chaos. And somehow graffiti on things and living in tents and squalor and having complete disorder and going around unbathed and ultimately having exactly what we knew would happen, people dying there from gunfire when apparently we're all against guns and we're all against walls, but we need guns and we need walls to protect that which we're trying to create. The duplicity and irony is unbelievable. That's the chaos and cognitive dissonance that drives the movement on the Luciferian side. And those that are putting energy into that, those that are finding fuel and purpose in destroying, not building bridges, but destroying, trying to recreate the world. Think about those words, trying to recreate the world. That's Genesis. We're literally at a place where they're trying themselves, they're becoming agents of their masters to demonstrate to God that God's world can be rejected and that they are the army of that. That will not end well. I'll just be clear about that. That is not going to end well in any place. Whether you embrace Christianity or not, I will just put it simply. That sort of imbalance in the world is never tolerated within the ecostructure of the universe. It just is not. The universe is built on a balance. We always have to have dark. We have to have light. We always have to have, as is in the passage, salt, and we have to have salt. We have to have salt in our life, right? We cannot have salt without flavor. So we need to have that duality. The problem is that they're trying to make everything in their own order. And we on this side are slowly looking at this world. And if you really think about this, and this is in a recent podcast I put up, it's a pretty phenomenal moment. So here's a statistic that I find incredible. 90% of the guns in the United States are owned by conservatives, most of which are Trump supporters. Okay? You notice that there has not been one retribution action taken by patriots using guns. Now, that can happen for a couple of reasons. You could say that President Trump has a lot of influence over those people. I guarantee you he doesn't have that much. For those that follow the Q movement, you could say that, well, they're trusting the plan, but Q doesn't touch everybody. And there's only one conclusion you can come to, and that's God's hand. Because the one common thread of all those people is at one point, one level or another, they all have faith in God. So God is staying his people while we witness the other side of this world splitting and going insane, quite literally. But it's really not so much insane as it's showing its true colors and its true faith. That goes to the place of the world dividing. And I really don't know that we have a way out of this division. And I'm not sure we're intended to. Okay? So I need to be clear about that. Is that when this world divides, and if we think of things in terms of, as I've mentioned before, kind of a quantum principle of life, a quantum physics principle of life, two realities can and will exist at the same time. So why this becomes so important is because as we go farther down this road, the energy that you're putting into the world that you're wanting is the energy that is the reality that will manifest. So these are big, big questions for people to be asking. They are big self-reflective places that they need to go to. If we don't, you end up in a trap. And the last thing that you would want to end up in is a place where you literally can't get back to where you were. And I personally think that's a destiny that we're heading into. And it's part of this massive world of division driven by deep psyop, balanced by an awakening of truth, where people are truly trying and successfully succeeding at awakening from this matrix. Think of the rich man and Lazarus story. I think this is a really important one in biblical scripture, because Lazarus comes to the rich man's gate and he's covered in sores, and he asks for even just the crumbs of the food that the rich man is eating. And the rich man ignores him, and Lazarus ultimately dies. Eventually, the rich man dies, but the rich man in the story goes to Hades, what we would call hell. And then he reaches to Abraham, and he says, Abraham, help me. And Lazarus is with Abraham. He says, send Lazarus to me, even just to dip his finger in water, to touch my tongue. I'm suffering. I need help. And Abraham tells him, you had all the wealth in your life, and Lazarus had nothing. Now Lazarus has all he needs because he stands with us, and now you are going to have what you deserve. But the story is important because it goes further than this. Because the rich man now says to Abraham, Abraham, I don't want my family to suffer this consequence. So please send Lazarus to them to tell them, because they'll believe somebody that comes from the dead. The response is so brutal and so truthful. And it's basically this. It's no. Because if they can't believe Moses, they will not believe a person that can rise from the dead. And there is no more bridge. You can see me. This is essentially what the story is showing. You can see me, but there is no way for you ever to get to me now. The worlds are split. In my belief what I'm witnessing, I'll say it this way. What we're witnessing right now, I truly believe is part of that division. I don't know what that looks like. I'm not trying to paint a picture of some sort of future prophecy, but the more that people get into these deep programming places, the deeper they get into those, there's quite literally a point of no return. There's a point where they can't escape it. I don't know what that physically looks like in the way our world reshapes, but we are under a reshaping of the world. Is it a physical splitting of the world, or is it a spiritual splitting of the world? It's probably a little bit of both. But nonetheless, these agents of agitation and terror are creating a reality which they are not going to escape from. And they may live that way. They may live in versions of Chop or Chad. Can you imagine the living hell that would be if you could not escape that? And mentally, they'll never escape it because the mind is our ultimate creation, freedom, or our ultimate trap.
I'm telling you, we are so very blessed tonight on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio here in New York City, New York, to have back with us great friend of mine, brother in Christ, true patriot, Pastor Scott Kesterson of the Bards Award Ministries, and continue sending your questions before the end of hour number 2 tonight. We're going to get to some of your questions. Also, not only are we internationally syndicated through the iHeart Radio Network in the iHeart Media Group, but we're also a part of the Premier Networks International. All right, we're excited. And something came to my mind, man of God, as you were speaking. I read today in op-ed that the Democratic Party, now check this out, because this is how sick they are. The Democratic Party has drawn up a document, a policy, beginning with the Senate now, where they want to invoke the Insurrection Act of 1807 against President Trump. That makes no sense. Now, to our Global Spiritual Revolution partners, you may be wondering, Bishop, Pastor Scott, what is the Insurrection Act of 1807, which is approximately 213 years? And mind you, as a side note, when you go into history, going all the way back to the recreation of man and woman through Adam and Eve, every 213 years, there's always some type of insurrection in history. Every 213 years. That's something to look at, and especially you gematria students. But the Insurrection Act of 1807 authorizes the employment or the deployment of the land and naval forces of the United States of America. In other words, the Insurrection Act, which has been invoked before throughout our history, and later in the 20th century, I believe Dwight D. Eisenhower had used it, including John F. Kennedy, invoking the Insurrection Act of 1807 in opposition to the infected states' political leaders to enforce court-ordered desegregation. Now, Brother Scott, how sick is it that you got a group of politicians, the Democratic Party on the left, who are trying to hijack the presidency because they did not agree with the outcome back in 2016? How is it that they have the authority in the political power, my friend, to use the Insurrection Act against a duly elected president? What say you, my friend?
Bishop, one of the things that we're really witnessing here is that there are no rules for the deep state. There only are rules in the speeches that they framed to make it sound like they're in rules. One of the biggest things, and we've already touched on this, is that this is a war of perception, not a war of truth. So it's the perception of the law, not the actual rule of law. And perception in this generation, which we could collectively refer to as a triggered generation, is that anything emotive, anything hearsay is supposed to be admissible as fact. That's thanks to the insanity of the internet, Twitter, Facebook, a variety of other things that they can say and do whatever they want and there's no accountability. So it all works well until it turns on you, right? And this is one of these things of, and excuse the term, but it's quite frankly useful idiots, because the deep state doesn't see these people as effective or as long-term investments. They simply see them as, quote, useful idiots to get to the end goal that they want, which is the enslavement of humanity, the destruction of the United States, the complete disembowelment of the Constitution. And most importantly, most of the people that we see in these power positions that have been there for years, let's keep in mind that they never intended to leave power and never intend to leave power. They had the system so rigged. The system was completely rigged until President Trump became our president. Up until that point, had he not become president, we would have been at hyperspeed. We would have already been in this phase probably after year one with Hillary Clinton, and it would have been worse than you can possibly imagine. I always like to remind people that if you think this is bad, imagine 300,000 MS-13 gang leaders that were strolling across the United States with machetes, wielding violence. If you think fear is something to watch a business burn, try witnessing somebody being axed to death on the street, because they do it, and they do it as a matter of pleasure. They are a true satanic element. They worship that, okay? So it's important to appreciate the magnitude in which these people were willing to go to destroy lives and ultimately break the will of the common person. It isn't, every society has different warriors, and warriors take many different forms, but for the average person that's trying to simply live a life, and I truly believe this, live a life with God as they struggle through the complexities of life, taking on these sorts of challenges takes a deep, deep spiritual strength that it's not that they can't do it, it's that if we're unprepared, we get rolled over, and suddenly we find ourselves in these positions of giving in. That's what they count on, and that's the power of this. So when we're witnessing this hijacking of a presidency, this coup that is continuing, this isn't just an event of policy. This is a continuation of an ongoing coup, because they're quite literally losing power. And right now, they've thrown everything at this. This is a total war in the United States. It is a civil war. And it's a civil war being driven by foreign powers as well. The difference is that unlike wars of the past and the way that Hollywood has shaped wars, we're not seeing uniformed soldiers with, say, green helmets and a red star on their head. We're not seeing gray and blue with muskets and people dying of lead poisoning on the battlefield. We're not seeing any of that, because this war was what they always knew would be the war, and it's the war for the mind. It's the war for the spirituality of people, and ultimately it's the war to capture the soul. Once the soul is captured, and that comes from willing compliance and giving away through free will what to their order and their power, there is no going back from that, and I cannot stress that enough. People need to really understand their red lines, meaning how far you will go. If you continue to creep, you will ultimately fall off the cliff with them. We have to really admire and look back at the original Christians in those movements, the churches that Paul set up, the strength that they had to hold the line no matter what. Regardless, they would hold the line. They would never give up their faith. It takes that strength to win this war, because ultimately what we're dealing with here is a complete breakdown of the illusion, of the matrix in which we grew up in. And in that, there are going to be casualties, and every war has them. The casualties will look different. Maybe it'll be the casualties maybe it's emotional casualties, maybe it's physical casualties, maybe it's spiritual casualties. But nonetheless, there are going to be people in this war that will not come out the same. All of us will be transformed. But nonetheless, staying strong in God, staying anchored in our faith, staying in prayer daily, having that place to always, when we feel the weight of the world bearing down on us, to take a step back, take a breath, hand it over to God, put our trust there. But most importantly, it isn't just handing it off. It's living that faith into your life to be able to look at this insanity, which we see, and be able to say, okay, God, I got it, but that will not compromise where I am, who I am, how I live. And furthermore, as an obligation to our life with God, I will continue to reach out and bring light into this world. Because if light sits under a cover, we don't see the city on the hill. We have to be able to bring our light into the world. And in doing so, that means we have to step out. I presented an idea the other day, and I'm going to continue to push this, but I just wanted to see this. We'll use our own version of MK Ultra for people. How's that, Bishop?
Yes.
We will, but in a positive vein. I want these ideas to set into people's head and really think about this. People feel that they're being overrun. They feel at moments that they're being broken down, that the left is marching. There aren't that many of them. They're just well organized in key places, and they have the media on their side. But I want to give you another vision to think about and how powerful this is. Forget President Trump's rallies. They're great, but what we see there are an amazing number of people willing to come out to see the president. But what if you had 50,000 people show up at one of these ridiculous rallies? Not to be violent, but to begin with prayer and then to sing hymn. Could you imagine 50,000 voices elevating God's music, God's song, God's praise into the air? I will guarantee you, whatever is left of that element, most of those would flee. This is literally an act of bringing down the walls of Jericho. But we don't think big enough yet. We're trying to think too much individually, like, God help me. No, God is there. We just need to connect, because there's so many of us. And if we can make that sort of powerful step, those are true steps of defiance. Those are true steps of strength. And they're true steps of bringing faith as a weapon into the world to enlighten hearts and to rock the soul and foundation of this very earth with the beauty of God's word.
My friend, that is so very, very powerful. We have back with us tonight the Honorable Pastor Scott Kesterson of the Bards Award Ministry, Continue to sing your questions during our Q&A session during hour number 2. I am so excited to be sitting under this powerful teaching entitled Zugzwang, Miscalculation by the Deep State, here and only here with our very special guest, true patriot, true man of God, soldier of fortune, and the host of one of America's most powerful podcasts, the Bards Award Ministry. We're going to go into a 2 or 3 minute break, and we'll definitely be back with you guys during hour number 2 with Pastor Scott Kesterson here and only here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio.
Jesus, we need your fire. Let us receive your fire now. Hello. your fire. Jesus, we need your fire. Let us receive your fire now. We need your fire. Jesus, we need your fire. Let us receive your fire now. Jesus, come down on your people. Jesus, come down on your people. We need your fire. Jesus, we need your fire. Let us receive your fire now. We need your fire. Jesus, we need your fire. Let us receive your fire now.
All right, welcome back to hour number 2 here, and only here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio, here with your host and moderator tonight, Bishop Larry Gators. I'm excited, and it is, again, not to be redundant or beat an educational dead horse, but we are absolutely being blown away tonight by a great teacher, a great man of God, the Honorable Pastor Scott Kesterson of the Bards of War Ministries. And please, if you have not done so already, please subscribe to his YouTube channel. All right, go to Bards of War podcast, Bards of Wars podcast. One more time, Bards of War podcast, and please subscribe to him. And right now you will receive weekly content from this great man of God who is a true soldier of fortune. Also to our Global Spiritual Revolution partners, please follow him on Twitter. His Twitter handle is @BardsFM. Again, @Bards, BARDS FM. And last but never least, please go to his websites right now. Go to bardsofwar.fm, bardsofwar.fm, and last but never least, bardsofwarfilm.com, bardsofwarfilm.com. And Pastor Scott is going to give you information near the end of the broadcast how you can financially sow into his powerful ministry. All right, we'll get to some of your questions here in the next 15 to 20 minutes as we are dissecting a very unique topic called Zugzwang, capital Zugzwang. It is a Germanic term or a Germanic dialect signifying a chess move. It is a chess move paradigm, and simply it means describing the obligation to make a move despite the fact that any move will weaken one's position. In other words, it is an indication, beloved, that play has moved into the end game. Pastor Scott, which brings me to my next question. With all of these chess moves that the global Baphomet Luciferian deep state system has enacted, beginning with the death of Kobe Bryant, the global unleashment of COVID-19, this pandemic, not so much of the virus of the greatest global house arrest in human history, which takes us to a new Cold War, not one of chemical weapons of mass destruction, but now ones of biological weapons of mass destruction through the global military vaccinational industrial complex, and now George Floyd. Are these chess moves in the mindset of the deep state? And number two, after you give us that powerful answer, are these specific chess moves that the deep state has been planning for some time now. But how is President Trump defeating the deep state? I have never seen, I'm only 57 years old, man of God, but I've never seen in my lifetime a president who is playing the game that these devils set up and is defeating the creators of this global game with their game, just like King David did in 1 Samuel when David decapitated the system called Goliath, not with 5 smooth stones. And to our Global Spiritual Revolution partners, it was not the stone, one of those 5 smooth stones that David unleashed upon the system that killed the system. It disabled or discombobulated the system called Goliath. And then the Bible says Goliath fell face first on the ground. Every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess. But what destroyed Goliath was his own weapon. Are we seeing this today? That, number one, are these chess pieces from Kobe Bryant to COVID-19 in the mess of these riots? Are these political chess moves? And number two, how is President Trump defeating the deep state at their own game? What say you, sir?
I think the first thing to appreciate is I think there's really two wars going on. And I've referred to this in terms of, for those that follow Q, the plan versus our responsibility. I think this is important because there is the draining of the swamp and the deep state battle, which, as we can see, is highly centralized in D.C., but has its tendrils that reach all the way down to our local lives. And then there is the other part of this fight, which is our responsibility to quite literally awaken, to reclaim the strength in our faith, and to stand strong and not waver to the temptations being brought on by the Luciferian order. So it's kind of two parts. So I think the first thing to begin with is this very word that you're mentioning. I think I'm going to pronounce it right. Zugzwang,
Yes.
Which is literally, and it's important for people to understand this, is that it's a process in chess whereby no matter what the opponent does, every move that they make, no matter how bold, increasingly worsens their position. So they may have the most masterful plan, but every move that they make, it gets worse. Now, I want to give you a real-life example of this, and to me, this one particular chess game exemplifies what we're dealing with President Trump, and it's known as the game of the century. The game of the century was actually the game that made Bobby Fischer, who became a multiple world champion in chess, brought him to fame when he beat Donald Byrne. And that was, Bobby Fischer was 13 years old at the time. And what happened in the game is that the game was moving along, and of course, all of the pundits, the press, everything, were looking at this as just one of these young kid going against big master. It'll be good for his career, but he's going to get trashed. I mean, very much, and there's very much a President Trump deep state analogy one could play here, right? And so, in this game, the one thing that was unexpected is that Fischer demonstrated some amazing innovation and some improvisation. So they'd go through a standard opening in their chess move, pawns and so forth, and then around move 11, Byrne makes a small mistake and loses some of the tempo and pounces. I mean, literally pounces. And brilliantly, he pulls off a sacrifice and sacrifices his queen on move 17. Now, Byrne ends up capturing Fischer's queen. And, of course, everybody's there going, he's done. But Byrne realized at that moment in time that he had lost. That's Zugzwang. No matter what he did, he realized this 13-year-old boy was going to destroy him. And in the end, Fischer used his bishop to force a checkmate and beat Byrne. And Byrne still had a queen. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it's amazing.
This game, it's an amazing story, and it's an amazing game. And it's really, when you study that game, you realize that's quite literally what we're living through. I think what's really important right now is that we hold on to some powerful metaphors and stories. Stories are literally what shape our reality. And narratives, this is a war of the narrative. And the narrative is creating the perception. And the perception that the deep state wants you to believe is that you are losing, that you have no hope, that President Trump will not be reelected. And whether you like President Trump or not, this is not a political statement. You have a choice, and it's really not a choice that all people want to make, but it's literally this choice. You have a choice of opportunity of moving forward with reestablishing faith and strength in a nation versus going down the other route, which is globalism and losing all your freedoms. I don't care who's at the helm. That is quite literally where you sit right now, because
yes,
I will guarantee you that President Trump is not a perfect man. I don't, and I'm going to be, this may offend some people that are true hardcore Trump believers, and I'm not intending to be divisive here, but I don't subscribe to the place of the anointment of the president. I think I think God works through him powerfully, but I think if we're not careful and we start to put too much of the vision of anointing on him, and I know, Bishop, you yourself have mentioned him being anointed, and that's not a criticism, so please don't take it that way. I'm just cautious when we go here because we tend to overburden that and not realize our own responsibility in this moment that we all have a part to play. President Trump is imperfect, but God uses him in powerful, powerful ways. And I don't even know that President Trump is always conscious or cognizant of how God's using him, but it always ends up working. And we referenced this in our show 2 weeks ago. I did included it in one of my recent podcasts. When the president walked across the street after his briefing about the D.C. riots in the Rose Garden, and he walked right across the street and raised the Bible in front of the church.
Yes.
Now, everybody should just stop right there and look at what happened. You literally had an absolute meltdown of media, but not just media and not just political figures, which we would expect, but you even had bishops and pastors coming out and claiming this was a political stunt. I'm trying to just think of the rationale of that. How can holding up a Bible in front of a church be a political stunt after a church has been burned? What that tells me is in that moment, God smote a powerful blow to the spiritual forces that had embedded themselves in that church. Frankly, my personal opinion is that in this war, which we're dealing with what we see, and then the spiritual war, which is going on constantly, I think quite literally that was a Luciferian stronghold. And in my podcast, I go into that in detail about the connections between that church and the Vatican and the embracement of the progressive agenda and et cetera. I mean, that was quite literally a Luciferian stronghold across the street from the White House. And with the raising of the Bible, we witnessed what was effectively an exorcism of a sort of God's way. And and you saw the absolute blow up of the media. They even went so far as to try to burn the church again. I mean, this we're dealing with a side of this was just the Archbishop in the letter he wrote on the following Sunday. In his letter, he mentions and he refers to this as the offspring of the woman and the offspring of the serpent. So I don't take that as purely biblical metaphor. I think that there is truly some truth to that, and I think we're witnessing it. We're seeing the offspring of the serpent doing what they do best: chaos, destruction, fear, violence, everything that they can do to try to break your will, to try to make you collapse and give up your free will and your sovereignty and allow them to rule you. Remember, this minority, which is a model out of the Bolsheviks, and to your point earlier, Bishop, about the Antifa coming from Russia, the greatest irony of all that is that who created the Bolsheviks? It was the German intelligence that then Antifa then migrates over and becomes part of the brown shirts that become part of Hitler's rise. And this is a pretty crazy world we live in. And the more that we unwind this, we find in this network of things that it's not that many people, that they're all connected and they're all related and they're deeply related. I want to do a little just a sidebar on this, and then we'll come back to this main theme. But to that point exactly, this is one of the things I came across last night, and I'm telling you, it's quite stunning. What do you think the possibilities are that Meghan Markle and Michelle Obama, their family ties back to a great grandmother in Johannesburg? I mean, this is literally documented. What's the possibilities of that? And the answer is none. None. Unless it was engineered, meaning that these two people were set up and put on track where they would end up exactly where they were. We are literally watching a fiction before us, a scripted life. And it's this goes back to your original position, which is this is the Matrix. We think that we have free will. We're operating within a very narrow span of what we make as choices daily, but our actual world, the orchestration of events, the rise of leaders, the people that we assume that we're willingly bringing to power, or William choosing Meghan as his wife as if this is some miraculous choice. This is all scripted. This was designed from the time they were born. And it was done to put on a show for us to control the perception of reality. What's one of the most powerful? I frankly can't stand the worship of royalty, and it's because it's truly false idol worship. But look at the power that the royal family holds over the world. And if there's any doubt about that, consider how Hollywood is especially under Hussein Obama. Imagine how Hollywood built such intense love affairs with the royal family, getting knighted and so forth, to empower the glory of this royal family, because that's the center hub of your new world order. This is what they're looking at. They're not looking at giving you freedom. They're looking at stripping it away and enslaving every one of you. And with that comes the greatest loss of all, because in the end design is to sever every person from God permanently in such a manner. And the science behind that is real, and it's draconian, and it's enough to give people nightmares to understand that it is truly possible, our ability to connect with God by destroying the frequency connection through faith, through prayer, and to be able to contain us as if we are in a metal shell, unable to reach out to our Creator.
We're so excited to have back with us my brother and friend in Christ, and a true soldier of fortune, a true red, white, and blue American, the Honorable Pastor Scott Kesterson. And our listeners all over the world absolutely love your ministry, man of God. And we're so excited to have you back here on the Global Spiritual Revolution Radio through the Life Radio Network, 92.9 FM, 1460 AM, here in New York City, and also out of New Jersey. Also, we are internationally syndicated through the iHeart Radio Network in the iHeart Media Group here in New York City, New York, connected to the Premier Networks International. All right, man of God, you made mention of MK Ultra. Do you believe that the global shutdown because of COVID-19, that this was the execution? This was both the execution and the activation of the biggest, the largest, and most powerful MK Ultra Manchurian candidate PSYOP in human history. What say you, sir, about that? Because it came to my mind earlier when you were talking about the MK Ultra and the contagion of fear.
I have no doubt it was. In fact, I really looked at this very carefully through the reactions of President Trump. And for those that have not read it, the Proclamation of Law Day, which he signed on April 29th, 2020, I think it's a very important thing to read. And I don't have it in front of me, but it's either the fourth or fifth paragraph, which you basically, in that proclamation, it states out very clearly that the future of the country rests with the people's ability to defend and protect the Constitution. And then it goes on to talk about all of the things that he has done to reduce regulations and to make the country more free for enterprise and business and creativity and innovation. So why this relates is this. And we said this earlier. We went through about 3.5 years. Actually, if you follow his campaign from the beginning, it was about 4.5 years of intense witnessing of a hostile and evil media that was designed to do nothing more than to destroy his life, his reputation, and keep him from being president. And over the course of that, we've had him increasingly tell people, fake news, fake news, fake news. So at the time that COVID hit and the media spun up on this, and we have talked about this at length in previous shows, the few images, which were a handful of videos that were being used by the media, and of course statistics that were being generated by who knows who, were used to trigger an entire global reaction of fear. And they were all these few statistics and these few videos were coming out of China. If we really thought about it carefully, I mean, there's nothing that China has ever done that's had any measure of integrity. End of story. So the country that prosecutes Christians, the country that prosecutes Muslims, the country that goes after every dissident group in horrific ways, whether it's mobile execution trucks or whether it's putting them in prison and doing literally vivisection to remove organs and sell them on the black market. This is an integral part of how China works. And yet people accepted their information as fact and truth coming through the media. The only way that could have happened is if it was preconditioned in people's mind. And we've proven that over and over. You go back to some of the texts. There's a book that talks about the virus coming out of Wuhan in the 1970s. We go into some of the films. We even have some of the recent films in the signage in Manhattan under Captain America that's showing COVID and Corona in the signage in their downtown. Now, for those that are skeptical of that, let me put this in a different frame to understand how powerful that is. In the I believe it was about the 40s, maybe a little bit earlier, but nonetheless, it was in that range. In movie, they came up with the idea of subliminals, and the original use of subliminals was to drive sales at a theater. So by you putting in a frame of, say, popcorn, about every 16th frame, roughly, sometimes a little less or a little more, there was a direct response between the idea of popcorn that hit into your subconscious and an increase in sales at the mid-break of the show. So it became so effective that they outlawed it in film. This is important to understand. They forbid the use of subliminals in advertising. But subliminals were defined by a very specific method. Subliminals now being used, if you use subliminals in that way, it actually falls under the authority of what? PSYOP command. So it actually has an authority to use it. And there's even ways around that. There's a variety of different ways to even circumvent those rules. But nonetheless, the point is this. The Israelis used this in the 80s in the elections in Palestine, where they embedded an Israeli flag every 16th frame. And in doing so, they swung the election 30% in the favor that they want, in the direction they wanted to go. So subliminals are very effective and extremely effective in the cultures that are not exposed to visual media. Middle Eastern cultures, especially in the rural areas that have very little access to visual media, these are very, very powerful instruments. In the modern world, we are media saturated. To give you an idea of this, at a point, people are so media trained at this point in time, we can literally visually see 1 and 2 frame changes, where before that was impossible for the brain to discern. And yet now we can see a 1 to 2 frame, and these tests can be shown. You can take a 1 to 2 second clip and show people, and it's like watching a whole story. In fact, we see this happening with the compression of video stories and how much shorter they get. But literally, we can now visually discern 1 and 2 frames. So the effect of subliminals in the traditional definition is no longer there. It doesn't work. But this is how subliminals work now. Instead of placing the image as a frame that's a blip in a subliminal, they do things like what we see in Captain America. They create a scene where your focal point is at, say, Captain America himself. But in the background, which we are visually not paying attention to, but the subconscious is taking this in, we're absorbing the frame of Corona. And on the other side, there is a virus, okay? This is a picture of a virus. It's the same virus as COVID. Isn't that interesting, right? So these images are seeded in. Now, to understand what's happening in the subconscious is processing something like 1,000 times a second more than the conscious mind. And it's constantly working this over time, where the conscious mind takes it in, we take it out, we throw out what we don't want, the rest of it sets in the subconscious. The subconscious is working this, and it's cataloging it, and it's actually creating a story out of it. So the idea of Corona and the idea of a virus pre-exists within our thinking. We are conditioned. That is MK Ultra style programming right there. So now when COVID comes out, notice how we went from COVID to Corona. Where did that jump come from? Because it was what the games they were playing with words. So they've covered a pretty wide variety of things, and they've triggered a whole bunch of subliminal pre-programming that's within us. And depending on how exposed you were and how much in the matrix you were living, depended on how much influence you were literally having over this media narrative. What we saw was a tremendous amount of influence. So where this leads to then is we get to a point at the end of April when President Trump, in my opinion, and this is my assessment of my opinion, literally had to say, okay, look, we've done all we can right now, and this fight some of the obligations of this fight have to fall on the people. I can't save you. You have to save yourself. So we see the proclamation of Law Day happen, and it's critical because from that point forward, if you notice, we have seen the craziest of crazy happen over the last 60 days. We have seen the riots. We've seen what's happened to our whole discussion about COVID. It's gone away.
Right.
What have we replaced it with? Racism, systemic racism. I guess that's what we call it now. Systemic racism, right? So systemic is another one of those words that if you really pay attention, they've been using this in all of these fear pandemic movies. It's systemic, this is systemic. So they're triggering up that old part of that COVID response, that deep programming. And so we're led to believe, and our subconscious is like, yeah. It's there. Yep, we've been telling us this all along. And it's like your subconscious talking to yourself, right? It's like, yep, you've got it because it's systemic. You didn't know it was there, but it's there. I've got it. It's in the catalog back here, right?
Yes.
And they're triggering this, and in the process, you get this second wave of I think what we're in right now is what I call COVID 2.0. We haven't got the COVID 3.0 yet. That's coming. COVID 2.0 is you have to be guilty, right? So whether you're an African American or whether you're a white American or whether you're a Native American, I don't care. Everybody's out here that's in this melting pot that calls themselves American. And by the way, just so I'm clear, I hate hyphenated American because I really see us as one people. Okay, it really grates on me when we use these terms, and I feel like we're being forced down that pathway. So it's not a disrespect to anybody. I find it to be a higher compliment just to refer to everybody as American because it takes a lot of work to get along. But nonetheless, now we all have to start going, oh my goodness, I have it. I have that virus. That virus is called systemic racism. I have it. I need to feel guilty. I need to give up my will. I need to give up my right. You're right. We need to rewrite the Constitution. You're right. We need to get rid of our history. You're right. We need to change the name of the state. You're right. We need to change the national anthem. I mean, this is an all-out war. The irony is, as we said already, it's mainly white folks that are running this war. I just want to be clear about that. Yes. And it's mainly white rich folks that are running this war. And it's mainly white rich folks that are all satanic, every doggone one of them, that are running this war. And I'll make another leap because this is not a provable leap, but I will guarantee you if you follow that path, the majority of them will be tied in with something to do with Epstein and pedophilia. Almost guaranteed. Wow. Because they are the most powerful people in the world. Okay? And all you have to see is the players right before you. Because if we take Epstein's blacklist and we start to look at all these names coming out here, the big names, not the puppets, but the big names that are behind this, it's an amazing parallel, isn't it? It's an amazing coincidence that you all happen to be on Epstein Island and you all now are screaming racism. Huh. That's pretty amazing, right?
And the connections to Jeffrey Epstein, and forgive me for cutting you off, man, I got the connections to Jeffrey Epstein. The FBI had confiscated one of the passports. This is some months ago. One of the passports of Jeffrey Epstein in his high-rise apartment here in Manhattan, and one of those, passports had a Saudi Arabian. He had a Saudi Arabian passport, and he had a Saudi Arabian name. And so we have to come to the conclusion: is he Mossad? Was he Mossad? Who was Jeffrey Epstein? And all of these people, you and I had talked about Kobe and Jeffrey Steibel being connected to Jeffrey Epstein, Lifeboat Foundation, and now Les Wexner and all these Hollywood people stating, I did not know Jeffrey Epstein, including Bill Gates. But their names were on the flight manifest that the FBI had confiscated. So I want to say a statement here, man of God. And again, I am so very excited about this powerful topic, Zugzwang, concerning these global chess moves that the deep state are constantly making, doubling down, calling Trump a racist. But these are moves that are not helping the deep state, but is weakening the deep state. As we're talking about Zugzwang, the miscalculation of the deep state. One of these holidays that black people, and I'm going to get a lot of black people upset with me, I don't care, truth is the truth, as we're talking about these psychological operations. There's a major black holiday called Juneteenth. Okay, capital JUNETEENTH, Juneteenth, where every 19th of June, once a year, the deep state and constantly, man of God, manipulate and weaponize both the pain and the trauma of people who don't know who they are. I'm talking about Black America. Now, what I'm saying as a side note, I'm not saying every black person don't know who they are, but there's a great percentage that for some reason they have to follow someone on this earth. So Juneteenth, when we go back to the 19th of June in 1865, there was a Union general, Brother Scott, by the name of General Gordon Granger. And he said in a declaration, a discourse in Galveston, Texas, on the 19th of June in 1865, that, notice this, all slaves are now free. Now, notice the language. He didn't say all people of African descent are free, or all black men, women, teenagers, children, babies were free. He said that all slaves are now free. What's that tell us? It tells us, man of God, that though people are legally cut off from slavery from a slave master, but psychologically, emotionally, even through our diet, that represents there is a great percentage of people, not just Black America, but Americans who are still slaves. Because notice the language. He says all slaves are now free. Oh, okay. So you no longer have the physicality of a slave master, but now slavery has been redesigned. And as a side note, this General Gordon Granger was a pedophiles. He loved little boys and little girls. He was court-martialed because Gordon Granger, but this is the man whom Black America looks up to as a liberator because of Juneteenth. See, this is the part of the psyop in the games that the global Luciferian left, they have constantly, Brother Scott, constantly took the black vote for granted. They have constantly manipulated and weaponized not just the historical pain and trauma of black people, okay, but at the same time, man of God, they have weaponized black thought in order for black thought to protect the system. Case in point, look at Joe Biden. You got black politicians who still support him. After the fact, Brother Scott, he said on live national TV, you ain't black if you vote for Donald J. Trump. What does that, who is he to decide who is black or not? What does that mean? You ain't black. In other words, black people, it is our job to awake you. Okay, I'm not saying every one of you are asleep, but as we're talking about the psychological operations and the psychological games that the deep state has been placating black America going back to 1865. Because it's through Hollywood that black America is taught that the white man is the devil, that white people were involved in slavery, and that white people created the KKK. Brother Scott, newsflash, that's a lie, okay? Because the original creators, and you and I talked about this numerous of times on this broadcast, white people had nothing to do with the creation of the Ku Klux Klan. Judah Philip Benjamin, a Rothschild agent and an attorney who was the Secretary of State in War for the Confederacy before and during the advent of the Civil War, right? From April the 12th, 1861 to April the 9th of 1865. And matter of fact, as a side note, Judah Philip Benjamin, who called himself an attorney but never graduated from law school, and he had married a 15-year-old girl. These are devils. And so, in other words, it's through the lens of Hollywood that these Kensarian devils are dividing black versus white, white versus black. White people had nothing to do with the creation of the Klan. And 95% of the slave owners, Pastor Scott, were not white. 95% of the slave owners in the South were of Kensarian Turkish origin, but were not taught that in school or colleges and universities, in seminaries, who are nothing more than cemeteries because they lack anointing, they lack the authority in the power of the Lord Jesus Christ. So this is more of a statement that the bishop is giving because, and there is another scientific term I want you and I to tackle, and I believe this is a part of the psyop, man of God, that this Gordon Granger said in Galveston, Texas, that all slaves are now free. You're free from the legality of what we call systemic slavery or the institution thereof, but you're still a slave. And this scientific neurological term of what we call parasitology. Parasitology, okay? Capital P-A-R-A-S-I-T-O-L-O-G-Y. Neuroparasitology. Neuroparasitology. In other words, it means quickly, man of God, that the human brain, because of poor dieting, this is neuroparasitology, or some call it parasitology. It is a neurological dysfunction that because of the bad dieting of a certain group of people, and because of that dieting, there begins to grow parasites in the human body, in the human genome, that, Brother Scott, it infects the way that people think and react. So this is the reason why I said before, slavery was really not abolished. Yes, legally it was, through the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863, and 2 years later, in 1865, through the ratification of the 13th Amendment. But according to Gordon Granger, whom black people look up to as this liberator, okay, who was also a 33rd and 1/2 degree Mason, a part of the British Odd Fellows Secret Society, that yet he's an American general, and a pedophilist. He was a major pedophile predator, but yet he is supposed to be the father of Juneteenth, declaring that all of the last remnants of Africans of African descent were to be set free in the state of Texas. Okay? So I just wanted to lay that out because I just wanted to see what you thought. Because, again, let me tell my white brothers and sisters, you had nothing to do with the creation of the Ku Klux Klan. That has been a lie perpetuated through the Democrats since 1865. Now, somebody may say, Brother Scott, well, it was Nathan Bedford Forrest and Albert Pike that couldn't know. Nathan Bedford Forrest and Albert Pike were the faces of the Klan in order to protect the real creators of the Klan, the Rothschild dynasty, through their American agent, Judah Philip Benjamin. And that's why I'm so passionate on this, man of God, because what I am seeing now, you and I are seeing now, we see white people all over the country kneeling before black people. This makes no sense. You got white folk, because of white guilt, kneeling down to black people all over this country and all over the world, asking for forgiveness for something that they had nothing to do with. Okay? This is crazy. Now you got the Pope kneeling down and kissing the feet of Africans and people of African descent. And let me say this before we give the floor back over to you, Brother Scott. You have to excuse the bishop tonight because I'm so passionate, because what you're teaching is so anointed and prolific, as we're talking about Zugzwang, the miscalculation of the deep state. What was it the other day that Nancy Jezebel Pelosi and the rest of those Democrats were at the Capitol and they all took a knee? Now, and I want you to look at this, man of God, because what I'm about to say, you know what I'm about to say. And I'm going to reveal this to our Global Spiritual Revolution partners. What was Nancy Pelosi, Chucky Schumer, and the rest of those devils from both House and Senate wearing around their person? A kente cloth. Well, the kente cloth comes from the Asante dynasty in Ghana, going back at least 3,000 to 4,000 years. But Pastor Scott, it was the Asante dynasty. In the Asante, capital A-S-A-N-T-E, capital A-S-A-N-T-E. So the Asantes were the African tribal empire, man of God, that sold our people into slavery. In other words, so then Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and the rest of these Democrats, representing both House and Senate, were on their right knee in the form of a pyramid with Nancy Pelosi at the top as the eye on the back of the $1 bill. And they were wearing a kente cloth, which was created by the Asante dynasty in Ghana, going back at least 3,000 to 4,000 years. It was the Asante Empire that made millions of dollars from the 1400s all the way up until the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. They were the ones, Pastor Scott, that sold our people into slavery. But yet, these devils on the left, okay, people like Chuck Schumer, people like Nancy Pelosi, okay, all wearing kente cloths and getting down on one knee, a.k.a. Derek Chauvin. In other words, what they're telling us, man of God, they're telling us who they are. So I just wanted to point that out because, and again, you hit some powerful, great nerves in me, as you always do because you're a great teacher. So Nancy Pelosi and to all of our Global Spiritual Revolution partners, look it up on Google Images or go on YouTube. They were kneeling on one knee like Derek Chauvin did. And as a side note, Brother Scott, remember this Latin word, sic semper tyrannis, sic, capital S-I-C, okay, semper, capital S-E-M-P-E-R, tyrannus, okay, or tyrannical. Those were the Latin words, my friend, that John Wilkes Booth, whose real name was John Wilkes Botha, whose bloodline goes back, okay, during the time of the Spanish Inquisition in the 1400s. So that term, sic semper tyrannis, capital T-Y-R-A-N-N-I-S, it means thus always to tyrants. Oh, that's interesting. So when you look at the seal of the state of Virginia, it reveals an individual, a soldier, having his foot on the neck of his enemy. What's it look like? George Floyd. It's a psyop. And so I really wanted to point that out because this is how these devils in the deep state have been perpetuating this lie that they love Black America and that they have Black America's interests at heart. But when you look at the seal of the state of Virginia, sic semper tyrannis, with the left foot of this soldier on the chest of this man. And as this man is wearing purple, which is a sign of royalty, I'm talking about the seal of the state of Virginia, and right beside, on the right-hand side of the man that's on the ground, who is being held down by the left foot of this person, there is a gold crown, Pastor Scott, on the right-hand side of the man that's on the ground. That crown is called the corona. So we had the coronavirus, and now we have George Floyd on the ground with the knee of this cop on his neck. I just wanted to point that out, man of God, because symbols and seals, these are symbologies that the deep state has been perpetuating and revealing for hundreds of years. And in my conclusion, man of God, you can just take over from here and take us to another level as we're talking about Zugzwang, the miscalculation of the deep state. Look at the seal of St. Michael. That is one of the seals or the awards, okay, that is given by Queen Elizabeth out of the House of Windsor. So then, the seal of St. Michael has his foot on the neck that's supposed to be Lucifer, but they have Lucifer as a black and brown man. Again, I'm not teaching color or victimology, but this is a psyop. What say you, brother? What say you, man of God? As we are about ready to close this out, probably in the next 8 to 10 minutes. So powerful.
I'm really happy you touched on the slavery issue with Ghana. And I was going to reference the book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney, which is a very interesting text, very intentionally divisive, because he wrote this in such a way, kind of a swing of the pendulum, to completely change the optics, that everything in Africa was the fault of Europe. And that he used the words very specifically, underdevelopment, not developing nations, but underdeveloped.
Yes.
And in the process of the book, which begins in the first half of the book, it's the ancient history of Africa, and in the forward part of the book, it's the modern history of Africa since slavery. Here's a very effective overshot or pushing away, whitewashing, if you will, of the principles of the activity that was involved of the local tribes in Africa. Slavery is a despicable human process. And the point that we have to remember is one of the most fundamental books in the Bible, Exodus, is not built on freeing, it's built on enslaving. The whole story is about freeing the slaves. So when we think about that, what do we gain from Exodus? We're supposed to gain strength, hope, faith, belief in God, and the strength of faith to lead us out. That's one of the principal things. Can you imagine how effective, or let's rephrase that, how ineffective Moses would have been if the slaves all took a knee and were guilty and worshiped their whatever reason, started telling their slave masters, I'm sorry because I'm a slave? I mean, this is literally or later on, and we kind of do see that in a little bit later on when Moses goes up to Mount Sinai. He doesn't come back for the time frame, and they all take a knee to Baal, and they rebuild the bull, and they start worshiping Baal again. I mean, these are some real quick overscopes, but nonetheless, it's an important part to understand that slavery is not a racial issue. It's a human, despicable issue. And it's rooted in the Luciferian darkness that people embrace, that having power over another human being to control them completely is acceptable. We don't hear anything in this discussion that 2 to 3% of the labor force in the American Revolutionary War period around 1775 were white indentured servants. Notice what they did. They don't call them slaves.
Yes.
They used the term indentured servants. It's British America. If people wanted to come over on the boat, had to sell themselves to the duty and service of another person, and they lost complete rights. They had no rights until they paid off that debt, and that debt could be revalued by their masters. So they were slaves. We forget about the Irish during the Civil War, that when they came off the boat, the families were separated. The North, that was supposed to be slave-free, took the Irish and put them into servitude with the Union to fight the South. We forget about the number of the percentage, which was high, approximately 25% of freed Black Americans in New Orleans were slave owners. My point is not to point at any racial division here. It is that slavery was part of the ascension to the elite class. Yes. And that's what people are missing here, is that the same elite class that had the entire African-American population, less a small percentage, under their complete control with promises of free phones, welfare, and a variety of other things, and managed to engineer the complete destruction of the Black American family, completely engineered the violence that is ravaging Black-on-Black violence, which breaks my heart every day, because there's more deaths in Chicago on a single day than there was in Afghanistan. Right. That engineering, that's social engineering now, they're losing control because about 30 to 40% of Black America is becoming full-blown American, if you will. And I'm taking away the hyphenization as a compliment, because they're saying, screw this party thing. We're coming over to be part of America as a whole and fight together. What else? What do we see now? We see every asset deployed to go out here and try to get them back. And the way they're going to do it is to try to divide by hate once again. And that's really what we're witnessing. So it's a very despicable method of warfare. What I would like to do, Bishop, in the last few minutes, I want to close with kind of a different, just a kind of perspective, if I can. Yes. And I think it's important, because these are some pretty heavy talks tonight. And so I want to refer to the prophecy against Philistia, which is actually Ezekiel 25:15-17, but I'm not going to read that. I want to read a variation of that, which is ironic, because I think it's more apropos, and it actually comes from Quentin Tarantino in his movie Pulp Fiction. And so I want to read this, and then we'll close with this discussion. And it goes like this, and this was said by the character that was played by Samuel Jackson. The path of the righteous man is beset on all sides by the inequities of the selfish and the tyranny of evil men. Blessed is he who, in the name of charity and goodwill, shepherds the weak through the valley of darkness. For he is truly his brother's keeper and the finder of lost children. And I will strike down upon thee with great vengeance and furious anger those who attempt to poison and destroy my brothers. And you will know my name is the Lord when I lay my vengeance upon thee. It's a very powerful text if we think about this, because this is really what we're being asked to do. Right now, our greatest task that we have before us is to extend our hand and be the shepherds of those that are in the darkness, that are being deluded by this horrendous and evil illusion that we are divided by something as simple as color. We are not. We have always been divided by whatever means that they can use that we will believe. Those are the illusions we have to let go of. The effort that we put into the future.
This is so powerful. Go right ahead, sir. I'm sorry to cut you. Go right ahead. We got about a minute left. Go ahead. Oh, okay. So powerful.
We need to lead each other out into the light. And our greatest power that we have with one another is unity by extending our hand, being patient and using temperance and the grace of God to lead those that will come, to join us all in a melting pot, which is God's beautiful creation of our talents, of our different physiques, our different beings, to all come together as one, because each one of us carries a gift that God gave us. And we use those gifts together, the world transforms. So I only say to those listening, these are heavy talks. Pray, keep strong faith in God, and believe that God will deliver, because God does deliver. And most importantly, have faith in humanity. Extend a hand to your brother. Put all this nonsense of race and color aside. It's purely an illusion. And embrace each other as God's children. And we will bring light to this world unlike anything we've ever imagined.
My friend, thank you so much. You know, I wish next week was tonight. I cannot wait for next week. And that was Pastor Scott Kesterson of the Bards Ministries, as he powerfully dissected for the past almost 2 hours Zugzwang, the miscalculation of the deep state. And for our Global Spiritual Revolution partners, that term Zugzwang is a Germanic word. It's a chess term describing the obligation to make a move despite the fact that any move will weaken one's position. In other words, it is the only viable move is not to make a move at all. But the deep state has all but destroyed themselves. My friend, I love you in Christ. Thank you so much. And how can people give into your ministry?
So I want to thank you again, Bishop, for an amazing show. You can follow me on YouTube at Bards FM. Bards FM is there. There's a little bit of confusion with the Bards of War piece. Just bear with us. I'm kind of doing some branding changes, but Bards of War is the core of what we are. We are all Bards of War. You can go to bardsofwar.fm, bardsofwar.fm. That's the Podbean account, and you'll find a donation link there if you wish to donate and support the work. You can also buy a copy of the film at bardsofwarfilm.com. All your support is welcome and greatly appreciated. And so I want to thank you again, Bishop, and God bless.
Thank you so much. And we love it. We'll see you next week here and only here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio through the Life Radio Network, 92.9 FM, 1460 AM, and also on the international level through the iHeart Radio Network in the iHeart Media Group, in connection to the Premier Networks International out of New York City, New York. And that was Pastor Scott Kesterson from Bards of War Ministry. Also, if you want to financially support Global Spiritual Revolution Radio, please go to paypal.me/GSRR Media Group, paypal.me/GSRR Media Group. And that was Pastor Kesterson all the way from the Bards Award Ministry. Zugzwang, the miscalculation by the deep state. We will see you here and only here next week.
The Matrix is everywhere. now in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. You have to see it for yourself. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.